The Middlesex District Attorney in Massachusetts is the chief law enforcement official for the state's largest county, with 54 cities and towns, responsible for prosecuting crimes, ensuring public safety, and supporting victims. Led by Marian Ryan, the office manages over 39,000 cases annually across Superior, District, and Juvenile courts, while also implementing crime prevention programs. DA Marian Ryan is joining me today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're in a tough position because you see the worst of everything, and you've been doing this for quite some time. And how did you decide to pursue this, to take this on as a long lifetime career, and to really, how do you cope with all of that?
I started in the office when I was an intern in law school. And really just grew to appreciate the role we can play with people. You're right, we do see people on what is often the worst day of their life. Whether they are a victim, whether they've witnessed something, or they or someone they love is being arrested or held accountable for something. And I think, first of all, it's really a privilege. We have a privilege that really only medical or religious professionals have, of being with people in those moments. And what I think is the best thing about my job is being able to take what we see and learn, help people try to get to a different place, and then really grow programs in prevention from what we see. We try to take tragedy and get it to where there's something that comes that is good of that.
Well, that's a perspective that I don't think most people can see. So thank you for sharing that. It makes it very interesting because you do have so many interesting programs. We're going to talk about some of those today. But let's first just go back a little bit to your background. In 2013?
Yes.
I believe you were first appointed to this role.
Yes.
And then what?
So my predecessor left to pursue private practice. I was appointed by Governor Patrick to fill out that term. And then in 2014, ran and won my first term on my own.
And you're up for re-election this year?
Yes.
And continuing to pursue serving in this capacity?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I think the experience that I've had in this job, as well as the representation I bring to this role, I've really never been in a better position to be district attorney.
And you're the only female in this role
female
in the state.
Yeah.
And how does that feel?
I think it's a voice that it's important to have at the table. I have wonderful colleagues, but the other 10 DAs across the state are men. I think when you look at where our victims fall, when you think about some of the issues that we always are looking at and will continue to look at, things like reproductive rights and things like that, it's important to have a woman's voice at the table. I
would imagine that in one of the programs that you were very involved with, starting with when you were general counsel, had to do with helping to identify domestic violence in partnership with hairstylists. Would you say that that's a good example of what you mean by having that voice and having that
I think
influence?
It's a great example. Yeah, I mean, obviously victims of domestic violence can fall across the spectrum. But I think that what we really saw was that hairdressers, makeup, masseuses, people who are providing personal care services are in a position to see things, injuries and things that other people don't see because we're dressed all the time. They also form relationships with their clients that often make them confide things. If you've ever been in the hairdressers or the barber shop or whatever, people are talking about some pretty personal things. And I think that's true for a couple of reasons. And domestic violence is one of those areas where it was clear to me pretty early on that that could not be just a law enforcement issue. The police can't make domestic violence go away. It really has to be a community issue. And that partnership that we have formed now with literally thousands of beauty professionals across the state has been a way of doing that public-private work that really makes a difference. Every time we do one of those programs, we have participants come up and say, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been worried about this client or that client, either because of things I saw or because of things they said. And we are never asking those professionals to be the police or to go confront an abuser or do things like that. It's really just giving that safe space to someone to say, did you know there are resources? By making them familiar with resources rather than saying, you should call the police department, they might be able to say you should call Detective Jones at the police department. Anything that will facilitate people getting to safety.
And that program is still going on?
It is.
And people in that profession are being trained on a regular basis?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of the other programs, you've really wanted to do a lot with youth, especially, and putting it in the context of the world that youth is growing up in and has lived in their short lifespan to date, like people who aren't even able to vote yet, or people who are just turning 18 and becoming eligible to vote. Can you go into that a little and talk about that program?
Sure. One of the programs that I've been very excited about that we began last year is our Empowering Citizenship program. So since I became district attorney and being the only woman in this position, I created an Empowering Girls program. We do that, started out doing it once a year. We now do it twice a year. We bring about 400 middle school to high school age girls across the county together, really for a day when they're not on their phones and they're just thinking about who they are, who they could be. I grew up in this county. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to see people in roles like mine. In many of the roles, we bring people to show them. We've had just amazing folks. Valerie Biden, President Biden's sister, came. She was the first woman to run a presidential campaign. We've had Olympians come with their medals and talk to the girls about what that takes. People have been so
How
generous.
Inspiring.
It's been amazing. It is one of my favorite days of the year. And growing from that model, we are in a place right now where people are angry and people are divided, and we could talk a lot about that. I really wanted to focus on showing kids especially that there is hope and that they can be part of that change. So we created Empowering Citizens program, and it was based in part on the book The Bill of Obligations by Richard Haas.
I've read it.
It's a great book.
It's a great book.
And
highly recommend to everyone.
It's wonderful. It's a tiny little book.
Yes.
It's a quick read. And we were lucky enough to have Richard Haas join us with the students and talk about that book. And the idea is that we all know the 10 rights we have in the Bill of Rights, but he argues that there are 10 corresponding obligations, things like voting, being civil to each other, being involved in your community. So we did a first program with the kids, just really teaching them about that.
Where did you do it?
We did it in Lexington.
Okay.
And then we did a second segment, also in Lexington, where we really talked to the kids about, okay, you're in high school. You don't need to wait to be grown up to do this. These are the kinds of things you could be doing now. We had a day of speakers talking about different things that they had done. And then we asked each of the students to sign a contract with us, that by the end of the school year, they would commit to doing at least 3 things. And then when they verify to us that they do that, we will supply them with a letter they can use for their college application program. There'll be some good
Fabulous.
swag as well. It was amazing to watch the students do that. I think sometimes we think about kids as being very involved with their screens and all of that. The kids spent the day with these speakers really just engaging in conversation about their world and how they want to make a difference. It was a very inspiring day.
Probably mutually inspiring.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. And will this grow and continue?
Yes. Yes.
How do people find out about it?
So we notify every school, public and private, across the county. We post it on our website. I try to talk about it as much as I can because we're happy to have everyone come. They don't have to live in Middlesex County. We purposely do it in very large spaces. So far we have not had to shut down people wanting to come. I encourage people like Boy Scout and Girl Scout troops, other church groups, whatever there might be, kids who want to be involved in the program to come.
Wonderful. I just think that today more than ever, it's good to have that available because people are selecting where they're getting information and what they're actually exposed to and not even realizing that it's not all inclusive and all encapsulating as it could be, and that it doesn't expose them to a broad range. It may just be very selective based on where they're going and what they're choosing to look at or expose themselves to, and that's really a wonderful way to do it. So I hope that it does continue to grow. And I think all of the programs sound like they're bringing so much benefit to so many people. You've had to deal also with, in addition to these programs, a lot of programs around opioid addiction.
Yes.
And sometimes it's a tough line to see whether it's a health crisis or a crime. How do you decipher that, and how do you actually decide where that begins and ends?
Well, I think it certainly begins with people who are profiting from other people's misery. You know, the people who are trafficking big amounts of drugs, who are really in business. We deal with them in one way. People that really are caught in their own addiction, even those people who might be, you know, they might be selling tiny amounts because they're buying for themselves and selling, you know, we treat those people in a different way. Accountability has to be a part of all of that. But what we want to be doing is, number one, ensuring that people survive and that they get another day to think about, is this time to do treatment? Is this time to have a different place to go? And also that we're providing those kind of services. So since we will be, since 2012, we have had an opioid task force. When opioids first started to be a problem in Middlesex, and frankly, we didn't know a lot about them. You know, we were used to the sort of more street drugs, the cocaine, the heroin, not sort of pills and opioids. And our first step, which really has been kind of a guiding principle, was we created a mobile policy forum made of people, consisting of people who were in long-term recovery, to really educate us. How did they get involved? What were things that might have helped them not get involved? You know, how did that happen? And then what finally got them to long-term recovery? So we really could learn from all of that. We've had amazing, no one does this work alone. It is never me doing it. It is really our partnerships across the county. One of the biggest partnerships was with the hospitals. We wanted intentionally in the beginning not to be at the police station. So we meet at hospitals across the county. And, you know, it's hard to remember this now, but back then, people in communities didn't always want to say we have opioid issues, and it was hard for those hospitals to step forward and say, we'll have the opioid task force here once a month, but they did it. Our law enforcement partners were amazing. There was nothing that we in our research and our work came to as something that might be beneficial, that when we asked them to partner with us, they didn't join in doing that. And what we learned, first of all, was it was a very long runway. Those first 4.5 years, we were doing everything. We were trying everything, and we could not reverse the way our numbers were going. And then we finally got to a place where we started to see the effect. And since that time, we've seen, and anyone losing their life to an overdose is too many, but just such a substantial decline in fatal overdoses across our county. And that's been amazing, obviously, for families who don't suffer that heartbreak, for people who've gotten to long-term recovery, and it really shows the power of those partnerships.
And in your partnership with the hospitals and the law enforcement, you've learned a lot and you've taken a new approach to that. But in dealing with law enforcement on other issues as well, how do you really draw the line between when you're dealing with law enforcement and then you have to investigate law enforcement? You know, that happens, and how do you balance that? You
know, the vast majority of people that we have in law enforcement across our 54 cities and towns are doing exactly what we want them to do. Like any profession, there are people who are not taking that oath seriously, who are doing something else. We are very transparent about that. We've implemented, for instance, an inquest policy when we have an officer-involved fatal shooting. Rather than the old model of the investigation being done and then sort of a closed decision-making process, we now go into court. We present that in court. The officer and his or her attorney is allowed to be there, as well as the family of the victim and an attorney for them if they have one. When that process comes to an end, we make all of that public. You can go on our website, see the reports from those inquests, see everything the judge saw, the 911 tapes, the videotapes.
That's all
of that.
public
it's all
information.
Public. You know, transparency is a good thing. And that's the approach that we have taken in those cases.
Let's talk a little bit about ICE and their role in Middlesex County, their activity, I should say, and how your department ensures that the immigrant communities feel safe in reporting crimes, because they may become more subject to being victims when they can't report crimes against them because they're afraid of ICE then becoming aware of those reports and deporting them or, incarcerating them.
My position since 2017, 2018 has been that I took an oath to do my job. I cannot allow ICE to interfere with me doing my job. And I'll give you 2 examples how that became a problem. First, we had a fire, a very significant fire. And that fire happened in the middle of the night in one of those balloon-constructed buildings that go up very fast. It was a frigidly cold night, apparently caused by some kind of heat source, space heater or something that had gone awry.
Where was this?
This was up in Lowell.
Okay.
And the report of that fire was made by someone who did not have legal status, who was leaving at 4:30 in the morning, something like that, to go to a job, and did what anybody would consider heroic, calling 911 and then banging on the doors of that building to wake people up. And the number one concern of that person was that that 911 call would somehow be traceable by ICE, not just for the person themselves, but for the family members they were living with. That's not how we want people to live.
Not at all.
Because
with such fear like that.
The people in that building were alive because of what happened.
Exactly.
And the status of the person who did that, and who we need to be doing things like that in that circumstance, can't depend on that kind of fear. And then secondly, we had in 2018 a situation where we were in the middle of a very significant Superior Court trial, and during the morning break on one day, the defendant was taken from the courtroom, and we couldn't continue. So family that had waited for years, case just couldn't go forward. The family of that person, who also had a right to either be found guilty or to have their name cleared, we just couldn't go forward. And as a result, in 2019, having put together a group of us to do that, became plaintiffs in the lawsuit Ryan versus ICE, suing ICE to prevent them from taking people.
When was that?
2019.
That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
What was the outcome?
We were able to get the first in the nation injunction prohibiting people from being taken in the courtroom. We really sort of broke the dam with the federal courts, because after that, a lot of other states were able to get that kind of an injunction, but we were first. And we were able to keep that injunction in place until President Biden was sworn in, and we didn't need to have that at that point. And
now?
Now we are now seeing similar situations, and that prevents us from doing our job. Our job is to have a trial, to have a just result, to hold people accountable if that's appropriate, to have their name cleared if that's appropriate. And when people are just taken away, we can't do that. And when people are threatened, perhaps, or just afraid of, I'm not going to court even though I'm being abused, my children are being abused, because, my ICE might be outside, or maybe I have status, but I live with my parents and they don't. Mm-hmm. I don't want to bring that situation in. That's not something that we can sustain. And it doesn't, our police departments have been so well trained and worked so hard to build trust in the community. We want people to be going there when they need help, to be coming to court. When somebody witnesses something, somebody could easily be in traffic, on the sidewalk, witness a robbery, witness an accident. We don't want the fact that they may not have status to cause us not to be able to go forward with that case because a person's afraid to come in, similar to the situation with the fire.
Yes. And are those people, though, also protected from crimes against them, maybe by ICE? I mean, you see videos of ICE destroying property, injuring people. How do those people have rights against that?
So there's a lot going on around that. There's been the PROTECT Act. The Attorney General's been, because if a case were in federal court against a federal agent, that would have to be done by the Attorney General. There's some recent legislation regarding people's rights to sue civilly if those kinds of things happen. So there's a lot happening right now around that.
Do you partner with the AG's office on any?
Many things, yes.
What are some of the key things that you're working on now just because of the change in environment and law enforcement?
So we've been working a lot around protecting the safety of people when they're in the courthouses, when they're in churches, when they're at schools, hospitals. You know, we're hearing credible reports about, for instance, people not scheduling a funeral service because they're afraid to be at some religious center. Lots of reporting, obviously, about people not following through on their doctor's appointments for themselves or their children. Attendance at school is dramatically
off. It's a big one, too. Yes, dramatically off. I think in Framingham alone, they're down 700 to 900 students, people who are afraid to go to school.
Right.
Out of a population of about 9,000. So that's like 10%.
Yeah, I think that's happening in communities across the state.
And then you hear that a lot of people are moving to smaller communities where they feel that ICE won't be as focused.
I have heard that. I don't know that there's support for that, but I have heard that.
Yeah. Now, there have been some very big cases, one recently about 2 women who were raped in the 80s right here in Framingham. And you just resolved that case.
We did.
What took decades?
So even though the police did a great job initially when that happened, they responded, they collected lots of evidence. There was a sketch developed of the assailant by one of the women who was there. Lots and lots of investigation. There was some DNA, which in a completely unbelievable turn of events, really, one of those women, it's hard to think, back in 1989 when that happened, we just weren't doing DNA. We didn't have the knowledge, the facilities, we just weren't doing it. But yet somehow she had the presence of mind to think that would someday be important and saved some DNA. And even though that, when we were able to do that, that DNA was analyzed, a profile of the assailant was developed. They were running that constantly. But running that profile only works if your DNA is in the system to match.
Right.
And this individual had not had occasion to have his DNA taken, so it wasn't in there. So the case, despite all of that investigation, we just weren't able to get to an identification. And then we, probably 3 or 4 years ago now, have retained the services of forensic genealogists to help us with this work. They were ultimately able to use that and get to relatives of the assailant, relatives of
who were in the system.
Not necessarily. They were able to do that. In some cases, we're able to use the commercial DNA testing that shares with us, the kinds of testing that people do. Some of those companies.
Like 23andMe type of thing?
Yes. Those kind of companies, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, make their database available to law enforcement. And we were able to do that and ultimately, in a multi-year process, develop an identification. That's only a tool. We can't arrest and charge somebody based on that.
Right.
Then the question is, let's look at that person. Are they the right age? Are they the right sex? Were they anywhere near Framingham? What have they been doing? Where have they been? Let's figure out whether that's that was another several years of investigation. We ultimately were able to identify that individual. Then we had to find him. So there was first that hurdle of who is he, then we couldn't find him. And he had lived in a variety of locations across the country. It took us a long time with lots of partnerships with law enforcement till we ultimately found him on the West Coast. Then we were ultimately able to make an arrest and eventually bring him back here, which was an eventful journey, lots of health issues and legal obstacles to getting back here, and then go to trial. But the persistence and the resilience of those victims was remarkable. The partnerships that were put together, beginning with Framingham Police and literally extending across the country, the people that we were able to find from 1989, witnesses who had worked on the evidence then, literally bringing them from around the globe to come back and testify at that trial.
That's an extraordinary effort. Oh my God. How many of those do you have? How many of these old cases are still sitting there waiting for that kind of attention?
We have probably in the low hundreds of cases that have never come to resolution, and for which we believe it possible to get to a resolution. You know, there might be a case from 1940 or something like that, where even if you could get to an answer, no one is still alive. So
what brings it up
likely
on the priority list?
It can be lots of things. We are always re-looking at those cases. Number one, thinking about new technology. You know, for instance, with the Gale case, the one we were just talking about, in 1989, the technology just did not exist to do that. So as technology develops, we're always looking back to say which one of these cases might there be evidence that it would be useful to employ that.
How do those cases even stay on the radar? They're not just like hidden somewhere.
We have those we've been able, since we created the cold case unit, to bring those all together, to have those available. Then the second piece is sometimes there are, you know, lots of things change in life. Maybe somebody knew something back then, and for some reason they didn't come forward. They were young. They were in a relationship with somebody they didn't want to jeopardize. Life changes.
Right.
People get sick. They have children of their own, and they realize what it must have been like to be the parents of that child. We often have cases where somebody just comes forward and gives us a piece of evidence that then sends us down a different trail.
So you created a cold case unit.
I did.
When was that created?
2019.
So I imagine that more and more old cases will finally get their day in court.
And the technology just keeps getting better. The technology has gotten better, really, from when we first started DNA, which was probably just a little over 30 years ago, to where we are now. It has really grown by leaps and bounds.
And how is all that affected by a statute of limitations?
So in some cases, if for a murder case, there is no statute of limitations. Okay. So no matter how much time passes, if we were able to get to probable cause to arrest you and we believe we can go forward, we can do that. With sexual assault cases, it depends. For instance, in the Gale case, the statute of limitations didn't apply because the perpetrator had left the state and fled and was gone all those years. So that is one of the things that stops the statute of limitations. If you've taken off, because the theory is we couldn't have prosecuted you because we didn't know where you were. Interesting. So that's an interesting piece. And then given the positivity of the DNA evidence in the way that it is reliable, I am now working with the legislature in terms of carving out something. When you have that kind of evidence, you should be able to go forward. When you aren't relying on 40-year-old memories, you're actually relying on scientific evidence.
So that would be a change in the statute of limitations? Yeah. Is that something you're proposing?
There is a proposal right now. There has been, those proposals have been around for quite a while. There are obviously, as with any piece of legislation, there are pros and cons. There also, as you know, legislation takes a long time. There are thousands of bills that get filed every year. Some bills never make it through because of real opposition. Some bills just kind of get caught in how many things are going forward.
The pros are pretty obvious, but what do you think are the cons?
Well, you know, we believe in our system of justice that at some point, even if you've committed a crime, you should be in a place where you know that you are not vulnerable to being arrested for that. And in part, the argument is that you couldn't mount a real defense. If I ask you where you were 2 months ago, you could probably establish that. If I were to ask you where were you on a Thursday night in 1992, even if you remembered, your ability to get supporting evidence is probably minimal. You know, who else is going to remember that you stopped by the library and then got a slice of pizza somewhere, or that you still have the receipt or anything like that?
Good point. Yeah. Yeah. That's. Some people can't remember what they had for breakfast, so you know, get that. Some of the more visible cases that have been in the media lately are like the situation that happened in Hudson with the mentally ill or the assailant who appears to be or mentally ill and has and attacked his grandmother with a skateboard. That's a mental health issue, or how is it decided that that's a mental health issue? Well, you know, that has to be proven at trial. Being not guilty by reason of insanity is a defense that the defendant, the perpetrator, has to offer because they know their own medical records and what their conditions are. They have to give notice to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, if somebody says, I have a doctor and I'm going to offer this defense,
They have to give that notice, and then we have an opportunity to have the person examined by a doctor of our choosing. And then at trial, there may be experts testifying differently.
So this all comes up after the person is arrested and
Yes.
then attain legal counsel, and then they take that approach. I said earlier, you see the worst of everything, and it must be very hard. That's another example of that. What about police and criminal justice and prosecution policy? For example, how do you measure success in your work? Do you measure it in convictions, reduced crime, reduced incarceration? How do you measure that?
Our core mission is protecting the public safety of the 1.8 million people in Middlesex. So one measure is where we are right now, which is that crime is really drastically reduced. Middlesex is routinely recognized now as one of the safest counties in the United States. So that's us doing our core mission.
In the United States?
In the United States, yeah.
What are the statistics? Do you know by any chance?
Not.
But it's considered
It's
one of the
consideredly
lowest.
one of the lowest, yeah.
In what types of crimes? Is it by type?
There are lots of studies. Most of them are by significant violent crimes, rapes, armed robberies, murders, that sort of thing. And then the other piece is, are we doing the just thing in these cases? Are we getting to the right result? That's one of the amazing things about being an assistant district attorney. You're not asked to bill a certain number of hours or to please a client. You are asked to do the right thing, get to the right result. We are charged with holding people accountable, keeping people safe, and in most cases, the vast majority of cases, thinking about how we change the trajectory of the perpetrator's life so they don't come back.
How do you do that?
And we try to teach our folks to really think about taking a holistic approach to this. People, especially in our district courts, have lots and lots of cases. But the people involved, whether the victims or the perpetrators, they only have one case. And you never want to get to a place where it's just, that's that kind of case. You want to be looking at who's involved here. How did we get here? What caused this?
I think that's different than you would find in most places. Or is it?
I think it's a philosophy that has certainly worked well for us in terms of thinking about, how did we get here? Is this a mental health issue? Excuse me, is this a greed issue? Is that what caused it to happen? Is this, something where there's a substance issue? Trying to figure that out, trying to figure out how we don't have a repeat of what happened. What could we put in place that would protect the victim, that is holding the perpetrator accountable, and then for the majority of people who will, even if they're incarcerated, they will eventually be back with us in society. What do we change so that they can be a more productive member of society?
Well, you said holistic, and I think it also sounds preventative,
Right.
Not just reactive.
Right. And that is very different. When I first started in the DA's office, one piece was crime was at a much higher level. So the volume of what was coming through the door was just much more. And I think the approach was much more, we just deal with what's in front of us today and off we go, and we're not thinking of the future. And you didn't do this work very long back then before you realized you saw the same people over and over again, both finding themselves being victimized or finding themselves being arrested for something. And that,
interesting.
This is not a business where that's a successful model.
No.
So we work very hard to be thinking about how do we protect people. I mean, there are some people whose acts are so dangerous or they are so unable to be in society and keep us safe that they have to be incarcerated, they have to be put, not with us. But for the mass majority of people, either they're going to get probably a pretty short sentence, or they're not going to get a sentence. They're going to be on probation. They're going to be on a suspended sentence or something. And so then how do you not just keep repeating the same circumstances?
So which strategies do you think have produced the most measurable reductions in violent crime locally? And which widely used approaches do you think maybe have failed to deliver results?
I think there's been a lot of things that have reduced violent crime. I think piece of it has been the partnerships with law enforcement, really thinking about targeting the work. Where do things happen? How do we target those places? Who ends up committing those crimes? I always say for everyone, they're better off if they never meet us. So the people who are committing these violent crimes, how could we be intervening in their life earlier to do that? I think in some cases, the sentences that are imposed in very significant cases have been deterrents in some of those cases. I think the intervention...
Meaning they're too long? Or?
No, there are, for instance, one of the kinds of crimes that you see much less than you did before is driving under the influence and the terrible impact that has. And I think that largely was the result of many grassroots and law enforcement groups coming to things like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, law enforcement really partnering around, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. There are going to be very significant financial and legal consequences if you're going to do this, and certainly if you're going to continue to do this. We used to be in a place where you might see somebody on their 5th or 6th driving under the influence. It's not that that never happens, but it certainly happens so much less than it ever did, because we've really made that not acceptable. Employment doesn't consider it acceptable. The cost of defending that sort of thing is not acceptable, whether insurance and lawyers. People, after they've had the opportunity to go to a program, then they're facing mandatory incarceration. That's really what's built the sort of ride share, because people now realize I'd rather take a ride share than face those consequences. Right. Yeah. So that's really been the kind of partnerships between district attorneys, law enforcement, and the grassroots kind of groups, and even things like restaurants and bars. I think people are so much more conscious.
Right, so just like attacking these issues from every angle possible and making sure everyone's on board.
Right.
So there's really no loopholes. It seems to be where you feel that it gets strengthened.
I think that strengthens it, and you see that impact.
Let's talk a little bit about the prison, the women's prison in Framingham, MCI prison, MCI Correctional. There's been a lot of talk about rebuilding, shaping, reshaping, changing, whatever the language around it is. It's a prison that's also been debated as to whether there's really a need for it. What's your experience with that facility and the programs and its effectiveness?
I think the reality is that, as with the other institutions in the state, the numbers of people in custody right now are at an all-time low.
Right.
So the number of people who are at Framingham is very, very low. Because it is the only facility with a couple of small exceptions for women, it is different than most facilities in that it houses pretrial and sentenced people. So there's a very wide mix of population.
So pretrial, they haven't been charged?
No.
Or convicted?
No, they've been charged, but they're awaiting trial.
They're awaiting trial, right.
One of the things that I think has been not good for women is because the numbers are so small, they frequently don't have access to the same kind of programs that men might have, just because it's not financially feasible to run that kind of a program. So it's more of a shelter
than a rehabilitation site, less programs, you're saying?
They have programs. They don't have the same programs that you might have in a men's facility, just because there might be only 4 or 5 people who qualify for that program.
Aren't the numbers really low,
They're
like only
low.
In the low hundreds?
They're very low.
Yeah. What do you think it is now?
I don't know, but it's low. I have heard that number. I would say it's more than 200, less than 3.
Is it the right way to deal, looking at your holistic approach and prevention and kind of through partnerships, and with such small amount of inmates at MCI, is it to put $200 to $300 million into that facility? Is that, will that be effective?
I don't have enough information about what the plan is. I know there's a very expensive, and I don't know the number, but I know there's a very expensive plan. I do think that an investment in programming for people who are incarcerated is always a good use of dollars. And I do know that women get less programming. So spending some money on programming, I think, is useful. As to the physical plant, I don't know enough about that.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about reform, forward-looking reform. And if you could change one Massachusetts law or policy tomorrow to improve fairness and safety, what would it be, and what evidence supports that choice?
I think I can give an example of one we have changed. We, for a very long time, people across the state were often held on relatively minor offenses on fairly low cash bail. So someone might get arrested for a larceny of something from a store or what, not shoplifting necessarily, but taking things and that sort of thing. And they might be held on $150 cash bail, and they wouldn't be able to make that bail. So they'd be held until their case went to trial. And at the conclusion of their case, assuming they were found guilty, they might get probation. So we would have held them for however long that case was going on.
Held them where?
At Framingham or in one of the institutions.
Okay.
We've held them now, and then we put them on probation. But probably all of us know people that literally their liberty depending on it couldn't come up with $150 in cash. Well, if you can't come up with $150 in cash, what's probably also true is you either don't have a job or you have a very unstable job. You're a day laborer or something. You probably don't have stable housing. And if you have children, you probably don't have the same people who can't raise you $150, probably also can't take in your kids. So at the end of that case, we would have a person who's now on probation. We've held them, say, 6 months, and that's a conservative number.
Really?
We've held them for 6 months. Whatever they did have put together has probably come apart. You know, they've lost their job, they've lost their housing, their kids maybe have been in state custody or whatever to get to that place. And that was something that if we didn't think they warranted a committed sentence, then why were we holding them?
What would you suggest?
And so we did a really deep dive looking at it. But, you know, bail has a purpose, and I have to be thinking of the public safety piece.
Right.
We have to be careful who we release. And we really looked at that, and we began in a very thoughtful, intentional manner to say there are certain crimes that we would not be seeking jail time at the end. And if we would not be seeking jail time, why are we holding you now? And could we not get to the same place by allowing you to be released on your own recognizance, your own promise to come back? And we started very cautiously to do that. And we really tracked where we were with that. And we saw that when we started doing that, initially, the number of people who did not come back to court for their court dates increased by a little bit less than 1%. But over 6 months, that flattened out to our numbers were the same. So people were coming back, they were getting the same results, and we hadn't disrupted whatever they had put together. And I think that's the kind of thoughtful, planned reform that people expect of us. It's never a good idea to just throw something out or put something dramatically in place. You have to really be thinking about what are we doing, what's the safety factor, and what are we accomplishing by what we've done.
Wonderful. You know, I want to thank you for having this conversation. It's been very interesting and very enlightening. And where do people go? What do you recommend in terms of getting more information about your department and contacting your office?
They can go to our website, middlesexda.com.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's fun to be here. Thank you.
Again, special thanks to Middlesex DA Marian Ryan for joining me here. And for more information or to contact her office, as she said, go to middlesexda.com. And thank you for tuning into the Audrey Hall Show, where you will always learn something new.